Hey, it's Barbecue and Bottles here. Today we're going to be searing a sirloin steak in cast iron. One of the most common questions I get on Instagram is how do you sear a steak and sear it in a way that you get that crust that seems to only come in a New York style steakhouse. So for today's recipe, what you're going to need: a steak, salt and pepper. For your pepper, go with whole corns, get yourself a mill and grind it down fresh every time. For salt, we're going with a thicker sea salt, larger flakes, that's already flavored with some wild garlic. Get some whole garlic, some salted butter, and some olive oil. So to start with, what you're gonna wanna do is take your steak out and pat it down so that it's nice and dry. One of the things that's essential as you put your steak into the pan is making sure that there's just no moisture. And the reason is you lose all of that energy transfer in the evaporation of the moisture off of your steak, when in reality you want that energy transfer to be going into the steak itself. So pat this down, make sure it's nice and dry. And we're doing this before we put the seasoning on. All right, now that we've got that patted down, we're gonna put on a generous portion of salt and pepper. And some people, they would advocate using other steak seasonings. I'm a big proponent, big fan of just keeping it simple and going with salt and freshly ground pepper. The biggest deviation I'll use on my seasoning is just whether I'm using regular kosher salt, sea salt, flavored salt, but otherwise it's always just salt and pepper. Pat that down in there, flip it over, and we'll do the same on the other side. So here, again, be generous with your seasoning. Fresh ground pepper. And now we're gonna let this sit for at least 40 minutes. And that'll accomplish two things. One, it'll let the seasoning actually absorb into the meat. And two, it's going to allow the steak to come up to room temperature. We've had this in our fridge, and given the thickness of the cut, we really want this to be sitting on the stand for at least an hour so that the entire steak, including the center, warms up to room temperature. We're going to be hitting this with a lot of heat on cast iron, and we want the center part of the steak to cook, and just having it start at a higher temperature than whatever temperature you keep your fridge at is just going to be an advantage to getting a cleaner, more even cook through the entire steak. Now that we've had the steak sitting out on the counter for the better part of an hour and a half, you can see that the majority of the salt has actually absorbed into the meat. It wicked out a ton of moisture, and that moisture has now had a chance to make its way back into the cut. Now we're ready to fire up the cast iron pan and get this searing. So we're going to be using a 12-inch Lodge cast iron pan, just given the size of the sirloin. Make sure the pan that you're using is large enough for the steak, and definitely get a solid cast iron pan. And it might be expensive to buy one at the outset, but it's an investment that's totally worthwhile. So the way that you can tell when your cast iron pan is hot enough to throw the steak in is just get a glass of water like this, dip your fingers in, and drop a few droplets like that on the top. This isn't boiling enough yet, it's not instantly evaporating, so if you throw a few droplets on the pan and it looks like that, it's not hot enough yet. Now let's try that again. A few water droplets here, instantly evaporating, so our pan is hot enough and ready to go. So what we're gonna do is we'll pour in a little olive oil. Oh, there we are. So just pour in a little around the pan like that, just to get it lubricated. And we'll get a silicone brush just to brush that around. Make sure we get a good coating on all parts of the pan. And now we are ready to toss our steak in. So alongside the steak, we're gonna add a few cloves of peeled garlic, and that's just for flavoring. We're also gonna add 2 stems of rosemary. Again, that's just for additional flavoring in the steak here. And as you turn the cast iron pan around, make sure you're using a towel or something like that that's going to protect your hand from the heat. This isn't regular cookware where you can just use your bare hand. You need some protection. And now we're going to add some generous gobs of butter into the pan. And if you've got a thick cut of steak like this, you can tilt the pan and do some basting, where you're just taking the juices, tossing it up onto the sirloin, and you're just gonna get loads of flavor. Coming through your steak this way. So we've had the steak cooking on this side for about 2.5 minutes now, so let's flip it over. You can see it's forming a good crust with the fats of the steak on the bottom. Just look at that. Absolutely beautiful. Now we know this steak is going to be done when the internal temp hits about 130. So let's get our instant read thermometer. Still have a ways to go. We're going to add some more butter here, just to make sure we get the browning that we're looking for. The sirloin's a lean piece of meat, it's not like a ribeye, so adding fat to it like this isn't the worst idea. And you can see the butter just instantly melting in this cast iron pan, browning up really quickly. There, it's reading 130 now. We're done. Time to take this off. Alright, we're just going to take this cast iron pan over here. So for resting, we're just going to wrap this steak up here in tin foil. And sometimes I put a gob of butter on. In this case, I'm not going to do that. We've already had enough butter in the pan, but we'll just leave it wrapped here in tin foil for the next 10 or 15 minutes. Let the juices redistribute out through the meat. As you're cooking it, the juices are forced to the edges, and you want that juice to redistribute evenly out through the steak so that when you cut into it, you don't have blood go everywhere. Now that our steak's been resting here for 10 or 15 minutes, we're gonna open it up and see the payoff. Just incredible. Look at that. And now the ultimate test, slicing in to make sure it's medium rare on the inside. Just look at this. Absolute perfect medium rare. And that is how you sear a steak in cast iron. If you like this video, give it a like. Make sure you leave any comments down and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more how-to videos yet to come.